So, welcome to this week's edition of Level Up Live. My co-host is on his way, but he was tied up on a phone call, so he'll pop in a few minutes late. As always, I'm joining from my watching. I wish I'm joining from my home office in Central Florida. Wes will be at his home office in Canada, I think. And so, what we want to know is, where are you watching from? Because we always like to know. We have an international audience, and we always appreciate it when you tell us where you're joining from today. So we'll wait to let you guys let us know on that. And always, as always, the other thing we want to do is we want to get you to put any comments or questions in the chat as we go through our discussion today. I've got to move this down. It just makes me nuts up there. Dual monitors vertically, and it just is hard to manage when it's up here. One second here. So let's see. We got somebody said. Somebody's joining us from Scottsdale. A Facebook user is joining us from Scottsdale. Well, let's see how I can show you that. Okay. And then Sam Tapper is joining us from Calgary. And, we'll have to ask West about Sam. And let's see. Okay. So today what we've got with us, we've got an interesting subject. We're going to talk about communication. And we've got Dr. Julien MIRIVEL, and he's going to help us learn a little bit about it. So we'll bring him into the studio. And Dr. Julien, could you tell us a little bit about your background and where you're joining us from today?
Sure. So I'm coming live here from Little Rock, Arkansas, where I live. I'm originally from France. I was born in Paris, spent most of my childhood in Europe, but I came to the United States when I was 15 to learn English, and now I've been here ever since. But my lifelong passion has really been studying communication. All my degrees are in that field. I have a BA, an MA, and a PhD in communication studies, and I've been a faculty now for 18 years at the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. So thrilled to be with you today and to share a little bit about how we can communicate more positively with one another.
And I love the subject. You and I were talking a little bit before that. It's one of the things that I talk about with my service managers in the class, because so often, and I'll just throw this out and get your thought on this, is so often we tend to talk in a negative manner. I think, and it starts with children, because most of the time we tell our children to do something, and when we walk in, what we see is what they didn't do, and what we talk about, rather than talking about all the things they accomplished. So you want to tell us a little bit about what is positive communication?
Sure. So first, what you just said here is such a great example, because it's part of the noticings that we have from our field about what's going on when people communicate with one another, right? That we have a tendency to be critical, that we have a tendency to not pay attention to the good things that are happening around us. So first, how do we define communication? The simplest definition of communication that I know is that it's simply the process of sharing meaning. And we use both verbal communication and nonverbal communication to accomplish that sense of shared meaning. Positive communication, the work that I do, really focuses on verbal and nonverbal behaviors that tend to produce both a sense of confidence, tend to create high quality connections with people, and that tend to produce, particularly in the workplace environment, a positive workplace culture, a place where people feel like they can be valued, where they feel respected, where they feel like they can grow and thrive. But one of my colleagues, just to kind of piggyback on your story here at the beginning, sometimes defines positive communication in this way. He's like, anything we do that we would be proud to model for our children. And to me, that's a good way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, I love that. That is really good. And it's interesting. One of the books that's in our class as well is Leaders Eat Last. And one of the things that he talked about in there was the fact that, that the way we talk to people creates some chemical changes in their brain. And we can either do things that make them positive and want to work, or we can do things that make them negative and not want to work. And it's kind of important which one we choose.
That's right. Yeah. So part of the whole work that I do is trying to help people think about what it would be like to communicate more positively with one another. And and really move in the different directions, because every day we have lots of choices. We have choices about how we talk to our children. We have choices about how we talk to our family. We have choices about how we talk to the people we work with or supervise or manage or lead. And what I'm trying to do is kind of show people a roadmap, a guide for how they may begin to move in a more positive direction, because very often we're not really self-aware, right? It's not, communication is not something we think about every day. We kind of do it like we drive a car. We just get in the car and we start driving, and we just don't become intentional about it. But if you want to be a good communicator, you have to start making intentional choices.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I was young, people would tell me, don't put your mouth in gear before you put your brain in gear.
That's right. Exactly.
It's like, think about what you're getting ready to say. And I think all of us have done that, where we've opened our mouth and something came out of our mouth that we wish we could retract instantly, but there's, and it hits somebody and hurts, and there's no way to fix it at that point in time, especially even with our children. So what is the opposite of positive communication? So what would we say positive communication is not?
Well, so what is it not? Communication that is hurtful, communication that is damaging to relationships. I mean, the opposite would be negative communication, toxic communication, hurtful communication. And on the extreme end, then you can get into things like, abuse and obviously anything that's going to have serious damage both to individuals, but also to communities and to the world at large. So, and there's a lot of examples of these kinds of behaviors. I will tell you, though, that in terms of the research, a lot of years have been spent studying and focusing on negative communication. There are a lot of research on this topic, but actually very little about, well, what happens when we communicate at our best? Sure, I'm going to have moments where I'm not at my best, but there are some times when I'm going to communicate in a way that brings the best out of me and that brings the best out of other people. And that's the kind of question that my research and teaching has really been focused on identifying, what do we do when we're at our best? When do we communicate with excellence? And you're totally right. I love what you said earlier about, once you say something, you can't take it back. It's a fundamental principle of communication. We say that communication is irreversible. It's like squeezing toothpaste out of the tube. You can't put it back. Once you've done that, you're not putting that thing back in there unless you've got the right technology, I guess. But so that's kind of what I do and the relationship between, to me, negative communication and positive communication.
Okay. And so one part of the communication, one of the things that you talked about was there's 5 ways to ask better questions. So you want to share with us what are ways that we can make our questions better?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to focus just on one. I mean, really, if I had to sum it down, part of what I try to teach people is a very simple distinction. When we interact with one another, we use questions all the time. So that's a first fact. If you look at your texts between you and your spouse, or the text you send to your colleagues, you'll notice a lot of that is question and then an answer. Question and then an answer. That's how we structure human interaction. And so what I try to show really in my model of positive communication that I've developed, and really also in the book that my co-author Alex Lyon and I have recently written, is that people need to learn how to flip their questions. And the way that works is this. So imagine on a Monday morning, you're going to the office to see your colleagues and you're busy, right? You've got work to do. You've got your tasks. So you may be walking down the hallway and you may say something like, did you guys have a good weekend? And you may hear, yes, no, but you don't really care. You're trying to get to your office.
Yeah.
Did you have a good weekend is an example of what we call a closed-ended question. It's a question designed to narrow interaction. And it's a question that actually closes off the encounter. In the book and in my model, I try to say what you want to do is learn in these moments. We're not totally aware, but learn to flip the questions to what we call open-ended. And open-ended questions, again, really simple concept, is about a question that opens up the interaction. So imagine on that Monday morning, instead of walking through the hallway and saying, did you have a good weekend? What if you go to one of your colleagues' office and you say, how was your weekend? What have you been up to? What have you been up to is an open-ended question.
Yeah.
And what that does is, and really what it will do immediately, is it's going to change the next response. So it's going to change what the other person is going to do, which is why questions are so powerful. So although that seems like a simple example, it's something that really occurs across all kinds of contexts. So as simple as saying hello on a Monday morning, all the way to you're having a difficult conversation with somebody and you may even get upset. Really hard at the time to say, well, tell me more about what you're thinking, or tell me more about your perspective, because that's where the listening would actually begin. But we're very often not doing that.
You know, that is so interesting, because one of the things we go over in the class too is about how to deal with unhappy customers. And I tell them the first thing you need to do is let that customer vent, you know. And so, you know, I understand things went wrong. Can you tell me about it?
That's right.
And what
That's
else? Right. And what else, till they completely run out of things to say, but then the steam's gone and we can start to build a relation or rebuild the relationship if it's been damaged.
That's correct. And if we paid attention to it, you would notice pretty quickly that we're actually very good at closed-ended questions. It's kind of our natural instinct. And I don't know why, I can't explain exactly the whole development of that, but we're good at controlling interaction. And so really the skill set that I work with people on is moving in the opposite direction, because that's where positive communication is. And that's how you can begin to create high quality connections, meaningful conversations, and even what we call in my field, peak communication, right? Moments that bring us happiness, that bring us joy, that bring us fulfillment.
Give me 1 second here.
Okay, not a problem at all.
Sorry about that. My phone, I use Google Voice on my computer, and it started ringing. And I was like, nobody ever calls me on that number. But yeah, I think too, sometimes we tend to ask questions from, on the negative way. I think even sometimes we come across that way. And all of those things, I believe in. Alex, and I'm a work in progress. I'm 70 years old and I'm still not really good at always staying on the positive side.
Sure.
But it makes such a difference in your relationships with everybody if you can get there. With you mentioned your wife, your kids, your coworkers. I worked for a couple of people in California once that in class I call them the crazy people, but their form of communication was always negative. I viewed my job during the daytime was to stay between them and my text, so I still had text the next morning. I just ran interference.
Exactly. So, and that's why I talk. So it's the power of questions in the model that I've developed. I talk about it as, what questions help us do if they're good, if they're positive, is they put us in a position to discover. And that's the intention of the kind of the positive movement, is to move away from making assumptions, to move away from judgment, to move away from loaded questions, right? Like where we think we already know the answer, and to try to see if you can put yourself in a position of discovery. And if you do that, my proposal is that you'll notice an immediate change in the interaction. It's like visceral. It's a quality, it's a substance that would happen naturally if you made that switch.
Yeah, and it's interesting because most sales reps get taught that as part of selling is using open-ended questions and trying to do this. But it seems like for a lot of people in general, even if they learn it in the sales context, it doesn't apply anywhere else. I want to we'll go back and ask another question just real quickly.
Sure.
You talked about in the book how to use personal greetings to build and strengthen relationships. So why is it so important to use personal greetings?
So, for me, greetings, it's like one of the surprise behavior. Everybody always talks about the greetings because they're like, how come this is part of like the model? And there are several reasons. One of them is that greetings are the heart of human interaction. Every culture that we've ever studied, every culture that we've ever examined, talk in, have greeting sequences. In the United States, hello, good morning, what's up, how's it going? If you go to France, people are going to kiss on the cheek and say hello. If you go to, Saudi Arabia, then it's going to be assalamu alaikum. If you go to China, it's going to be ni hao. So anywhere we go, greetings are the heart of how we make connection. But what makes greetings really powerful, it's the way through which we acknowledge each other's presence and say, I see that you're there and I see that you exist. And so that's why in the model, I really talk about it as an act of positive communication, because greeting is an invitation to connection. No other interaction takes place without that kind of move. And so if you can make the first move, if you can be the one to initiate, what you're going to sense is that suddenly you are inviting human relationships into your world. And as a leader, that's really critical because you're the one people look up to, right? And if you can be the one to connect, then you're going to not only connect relationships, but make people feel valued, make people feel like they're being seen.
Yeah, one thing I would add probably to that is I love to use their name. Because,
yeah, absolutely.
Because that's a huge piece of it. If you just say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" That's a whole lot. It's very different than if I talk to Wes. I'll bring him into our conversation, make him do some work. But if I say, "Hey, Wes, how are you doing today?" That's very different than saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" It's just that just one word makes that a different sense of feeling to it.
That's correct. Yeah. In the book, we talk also about email communication. Great study that was done in New Zealand showed that when people do not greet each other in emails, it actually also has an impact on the larger culture. If you just start an email by saying, the reports are due in 2 weeks from today, thanks, John, or you follow up with, we're meeting on Friday, thanks all, Julien, that's very different from saying, hey team, I hope you're having a great week. Looking forward to our meeting on Friday at 5:00. Have a great rest of the week. And it doesn't take much, right? It's like very small details, but that's what creates cultures. And so in the book, we try to show that there's a really deep relationship between these little micro behaviors and what we end up creating in our lives, in our relationships, in our lives, and of course in our workplaces if you're in the role of a leader.
Yeah. That's very nice. One of the other things that you talked about was complimenting, and you said it's vital, but it's also hard or difficult to do. So why is that so important?
So a couple of things. Well, one, what makes it difficult to do is we sometimes don't see it. So there's two processes in place when we talk about complimenting. One of them is we may have a hard time seeing the strength that we see in other people. And that's something we have to work on in terms of awareness, to realize, like, I'm focusing on the negative. I'm focusing on the critical part of me. I'm focusing on the judgmental part of me. The second problem is we may notice it, but we don't say it. And in the world of human relationships, what you think doesn't matter. What you feel doesn't matter. What actually impacts human relationships is what you say and do. And so complimenting for me is like the most direct. There are a lot of ways we can be positive, but it's the most direct line between me saying, I see the strength in you. I think it, I know it, but I'm going to let you know, and that will shape who you are. And more importantly, who you might become.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think, again, we go back to the supervisor, employee relationship.
Yeah.
Again, we tend to be on the negative side. And we talked to just briefly, I'm a big fan of the 1 Minute Manager. And he talks about 1 minute praisings. And I talk to the service managers and I tell them that think about how you feel when somebody says something nice about what you did. And it's like you get this verbal pat on the back and you're like, ooh, I like that. I want some more of it.
Yeah.
And so you can motivate your team to do, I think you can get more work out of them and gain more productivity. And have a happier team by being, like I said, focus on the compliments or recognize the good parts of what they do, and then go from there.
And to add to that, we know that just from the research. So today, people study, measure employee engagement in the workplace, and one of the key questions they use to measure employee engagement is this: have you been praised in the last 7 days by your supervisor? And when that question is rated very highly, almost often you have a very great culture where people are really engaged and productive. When there's none of that, the lower it is, the more likely it is that you've got a negative workplace. And people feel the difference. We have a deep need to be valued as individuals. We have a deep need to be respected. And we need to be seen as competent beings. So we don't want to go overboard. To me, you know, like when I talk about complimenting, I understand that we have to have hard conversations as leaders. That's part of the job. We may need to have them. It's kind of the balance, right? So we talk about the 1-to-5 ratio that's so famous by John Gottman. For every one negative act in the relationship, if you can compensate it with 5 positive acts, you've got a great connection. It's when it gets out of whack that you're going to have a problem. So as a leader, as a manager, you need to be thinking about what that ratio is for you and understanding that it's any criticism you make. I kind of like this quote, but any criticism you make is going to undermine performance. It doesn't improve performance. Anytime you criticize, you simply undermine performance. And when you compliment, you actually improve performance.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I liken it to, you know, if you're going to have to encourage somebody to do something differently, first of all, rather than you telling them, you ask them how could they have done it better. So you let them discover for themselves. But I say make it like an Oreo cookie where you've got, you know, some you know, praise on the front side. You know, okay, I really appreciate how hard you work. You know, and then we go in but you know, there's something came up the other day and, you know, I think we could have handled that better. What do you think? How could we have done it better? And then, you know, I know you'll do better in the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing how good you do with this. So that the result is that when they walk out, they don't feel bad. You've adjusted their thinking, but they don't feel bad, because if they walk out feeling bad or feeling mad, which is even worse, you know, it's going to have an effect on the other coworkers and your relationship.
That's correct. I mean, I think we can all think of situations in which, and that doesn't mean that we can learn to respond effectively to negative feedback as well. I think we can. But in general, when we look at our lives, we feel a lot much more inspired to change and to improve when we know we have people who believe in us. That's the bottom line. And in order to receive feedback, we also have to have a lot of trust with that person, because anytime we give feedback, it means we have to make a change. And making a change means we have to make an effort, right? That we have to be somebody that we may not yet be. We have to become, depending on what the feedback is, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, it's at the heart of positive. It's an exemplar of positive communication. If you're able to do that consistently, if you're able to pay attention to the positive and make sure to express it, because if you keep it in your mind, it doesn't make any impact.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let's let West have a little bit of share in the conversation. Usually I have to fight to get my words in, so he's being nice today.
That's great. Well, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, well, a pleasure. And thank you very much for being on the program today. And my sincere apologies for being a little late. I was actually on a business call for a contract, which ran a little over. So
that totally makes sense. No worries at all. It's
really
your show.
And thank you, Ken. Ken, as always, when you talk about compliments, he's one of the most reliable and steadfast people that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Right. So thank you very much for taking the lead in the beginning. Yeah. And listening to what you were saying about complimenting, that, you know, I do think in my mind that it is hard when you have to give, like you said, more critical sort of feedback for things. And I think there's cleverer ways to do that, right? So if I'm complimenting someone, I can say, you know, Ken, you are absolutely amazing at this travel show that you do, right? You know, what you're doing for, you know, people with disabilities and making sure that's accessible. And if where I'm trying to go is to get them to change course on something that may be that direction, I don't think it's devious, you tell me, but I would say the same thing that you're doing there, that other show that you're doing, that we're doing together, can you, like, you know, do that too? Because I love it, right? You know what I mean? Is that fair? Is that a good way to?
No, I think that's a great example of how, you know, we can give effective feedback. I do think that there's a lot of techniques that can be used to be able to tell people the things we need to tell them for improvement, particularly in the workplace, where we do have to hold people accountable to certain levels of performance, right? And if you're a leader or manager, you can't just go around complimenting all the time. That to me, that's not a realistic version of what leadership and positive communication is about. Positive communication also includes authentic, genuine, hard, difficult conversations. It has to. It's the way you go about doing it that makes a difference. So what you showed there are perfect examples. There are others. Sometimes it's just asking a question like, I noticed that you've been late last week several times in a row. What's going on with you? And asking a question, as we talked about at the opening of the show, then puts you in a position of discovery, right?
I love it.
For a while, I was dean of a college. I had a bit of an issue with one of my employees being late. I talked to her using about the same approach. And I found out that the reason she was late is because she didn't have transportation. And she couldn't get to work because she took the bus every morning. And if you take the bus, like, if you miss the bus, it's all over.
Yeah.
Try to make it to your destination. And if the bus is late, then you may miss your other connection, which means that it's all over then. So that allowed me and her to work on a plan and figure out how we could do to ensure at least the office was covered while making sure we were honoring her challenges as well. So I'm a firm believer that you have to have both. Complimenting is not the antithesis to difficult conversation. They're not opposite.
I really love what you say about questions leading to discovery, right? And because that really frames it around the person as well, right? That it's that what you're concerned about is them, and you get stuff out of that discovery that you didn't have before. What a really great way to express that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And I know for myself, the way that I work is that my purpose, I guess, in my career is driven a lot more by purpose and feeling that I'm contributing value. And of course, money is important, but that's not why I do things. So that motivating, like you said, through compliments definitely works with me, right?
Yes.
Because it fires me up to give them even more, right?
That's right. And again, what I would say on that, is that it's not just you. It's literally almost every person on earth, because we know that a fundamental human need is to be loved, to be appreciated, and to be valued. That's across the board, right? Like yesterday, I was on a Zoom call with one of my students with whom we're doing kind of some project. And we were analyzing some data, and I said, oh man, you're really instinctive about the way you're analyzing qualitative data. You have a talent there, and we're going to be able to really do this. And she's like, her first response was like, you're speaking my love language, right? Which means that every person here, every person who's listening, every person who is thinking about this will realize, oh man, I do have that need. I have a need to be recognized. I have a need to be seen as a valuable person. And we can do that. And leaders should build up rather than to tear down.
Agreed. And listen, in respect for your time, we are coming up on the bottom of the half hour, right? So,
okay, great.
Yeah. One of the last points that we had there was 5 ways to ask better questions. So when you talked about questions and discovery, and correct me, you haven't gone through this already, have you?
So we talked a little bit at the opening of the call about the power of questions and how to get there. So we've done greetings and questions and then complimenting, which are 3 parts of the model that I've developed.
Well, that's great. And obviously cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your busy day to be with the audience, right?
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. And, we're here to spread. I'm here, and my colleague, Alex Lyon, with whom I wrote my latest book, Positive Communication for Leaders, really are trying to spread these ideas. The model I developed that you see here in the picture is something that took place about 10 years ago. Really took a lot of hard work to identify key positive communication behaviors that are backed up by research and science to make sure that these are worth practicing. And I hope that now we have a book that gives leaders, this is the first book that I wrote, The Art of Positive Communication. My latest book is Positive Communication for Leaders. And we're getting a lot of great reviews and that you'll see on Amazon about how practical this is. And really, that's kind of a beautiful thing to see, because we really wanted to make the book accessible, practical. And so if you're a leader, if you're an emerging leader and you're not sure what to do, if you are in a leadership role with experience and you want to know how to lead your team effectively and positively, honestly, there's no way you cannot succeed with this book. I mean, it's as practical as we can make it.
Well, that's great. I did pop it up there for everyone so they can see it and obviously
Thank you so
recognize
much.
the title there. We've also got your website up there so people can visit JulienMIRIVEL.com. And once again, such a positive thing to be able to share these lessons with people. And to all of our viewers as well, we want to thank you for joining us today for another episode of Level Up Live. And as I always say, Ken, until next time, keep learning.
And keep leveling up.
All right.
All right, I'll do the same thing. It's nice to meet you both, and thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.